All right, I think we are recording now. Welcome, all listeners, to the Mega Alumni Podcast. I believe this is going to be our fourth episode now. My name is Nehal, and I am a graduate student at The Ohio State University in the Mechanical Engineering Department. I'm working on my PhD here, and all grad students are a part of the Graduate Student Association, which is what we call MEGA. And hopefully, with this podcast, we can network our current students with our alumni. I also have Katie, another fellow grad student from Mega, joining for this episode. Katie, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'll be real quick. So I am Katie, also a PhD student in mechanical engineering, also involved with Mega. So I'll be co-hosting, asking a few questions with Nehal today.
Thank you very
Uh,
much. Yeah,
I can go ahead. Okay. So our guest for today, is at a primarily undergraduate institution, Otterbein University, so close to home, close to OSU. I'll let him introduce himself, but he's an associate professor and department chair for the engineering and computer science department. But that's a really brief intro. I'll let him add to that.
Sure, Nahal and Katie, thank you both for having me on today. So my name's Dr. Mike Hudoba. Everyone here just calls me Dr. Mike. And I've been at Otterbein. This is my 8th year. I went to Ohio State for all of my degrees. So I came to Columbus from Youngstown, Ohio in 2005. Got my bachelor's in mechanical engineering in 2009. I was part of the BSMS program, the combined BSMS degree. So I finished that up in 2011, where I did some work in user-centered product design with Dr. Blaine Lilly. And then after my master's was over, I started my PhD with Dr. Carlos Castro, where we did some fun stuff with DNA origami nanomachines. And throughout that time, both through Ohio State and actually through some external partners, I started to get more involved and more passionate about education, which led me down a path that I didn't expect to be on when I started in engineering in 2005, but really enjoyed teaching, really enjoyed mentoring and working with young students. And so ended up here at Otterbein and been here 8 years, and I'm still happy to be here. So
sounds great. Yeah. Uh, could you go a little more into how you ended up at Otterbein after your PhD? Like, was I think I remember. So we had the opportunity of meeting you when you came to give a seminar at in our department, and I think you mentioned that you had a phase where you were able to try out teaching at Otterbein. Do I recall that correctly?
So it was actually teaching at Ohio State.
Oh, okay.
And so, a lot of students, whether it's, because they need the funding, whatever it might be, work as a graduate teaching assistant, which I really enjoyed. But, each opportunity is, limited in the sense that, you're not necessarily running a class, you're kind of here's what you need to do every day and that kind of thing. And I did enjoy that. I taught some labs, I taught some recitation sections, but actually basically I got the opportunity to adjunct a course, the numerical methods course at Ohio State. And it was not the entire semester. I think it was about, 8 or 10 weeks. And I absolutely loved it. And it was great. And it really gave me the opportunity to kind of, put my own stamp on the course. Obviously I still had to hit the education goals and things like that, but I really got to approach it my own way, which is kind of what led me to realize that I think I had a knack for this. I definitely enjoyed it. And so it was great. It was kind of like you said, a trial run, much different than what I'm doing here. Because if I remember correctly, I had about 125 kids in that class. And here in my Otterbein classes, I have anywhere from 6 to 25. So nowhere near the 125 like I had at OSU. But both large and small classes are fun in their own right, but they're definitely different.
Right, right. Uh, and yeah, just kind of the so after you kind of figured out that you did want to teach, what was the how did you find out that Otterbein was the right choice for you uh, as you got closer to graduation?
Yeah, so it was interesting because, and this is what I discussed a little bit at the seminar when I met the two of you. Um, Teaching at a place like Otterbein was never really on my radar, just because as a graduate student, that's not something that is ever talked about as much as, let's say, industry or going into a big R1 research institution. But I knew I liked the teaching side of it, and I knew some of my colleagues at Ohio State and professors. A lot of their focus goes into research, as opposed to teaching, just from a time standpoint. And so it wasn't even really on my radar until my advisor, Dr. Castro, said, this is something I should start to consider, teaching at a smaller place. And like I said, I'd never thought about it. I didn't even know what the schools were that he was talking about. To be honest, at that point, I had heard of Otterbein, but I had never been up here, even though it was only 15 minutes from where I lived for 12 years. And fortunately, in 2015, so I graduated my PhD in 2016. In 2015, Otterbein started their engineering program. And come the second academic year, they were looking to fill the position. And I believe I was actually put in contact with the Dr. Gary Mall, who actually was an Ohio State professor, who helped start the Otterbein engineering. He knew some of the same people that I knew at Ohio State. And so when he was looking, they pointed him in my direction. I got the application, I put the materials together, came on the site visit. And yeah, I thought, this is the kind of place I wanted to be. The size of the class, I think, is really what pushed me in this direction, because I knew that I would get the opportunity to really have a positive impact and positive influence on a lot of students. I'll have students for 7 or 8 classes throughout their 4 years here, so I know them when they walk in the door as freshmen. I know them when they leave as seniors. I know them as alumni. I actually just had lunch with an alumni last week, just to catch up and see how things are going. And I always laugh too. The timing was interesting because the new faculty orientation was 3 days long, and I had to miss day 2 at orientation at Otterbein because I was defending my dissertation. And this is a funny story. I was in my suit. I was on my best behavior. I'm ready to start my new big kid job, as they say. And obviously, I'm also nervous about defending my dissertation. And the provost at the time at Otterbein came up to me on day 1, and he said, "Hey, Mike, good luck tomorrow, because you can't have this job if you don't have a PhD." Obviously, he was joking and kind of putting a smile on my face and kind of ease the tension. But I'm always like, "Oh yeah, that is true." So there's a lot riding on tomorrow, but things went well.
Yeah, yeah.
So a question that we had that's sort of related to this was, could you talk about sort of the application or interview process for PUIs versus R1 institutions? Do you do more of like a teaching focused interview, I guess, or more like teaching samples? I guess if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, and that was interesting for me because, so in the application details, for example, and this is, I'm assuming, the same no matter where you go, is you have to have a number of things, but 2 of them are, a research statement, what you have done and what your plan will be moving forward. And then you also have some sort of philosophy of teaching and mentoring statement. And then during the interview, when the on-campus interview occurs, I gave both a teaching showcase, where I basically just taught a mock class, and a research presentation. The research presentation was easy, just because working with Dr. Castro, we did a lot of travel, a lot of conferences, and so it was kind of something I'd done a lot before, with the addition of, here's what I would want to do in the future, if I had my own space. But the teaching, I had to, do a little extra research, right? I knew what to do in front of a classroom. I enjoyed that. but you really, just like you want to, put things in your research talk and cite your sources, and have evidence behind what you're saying. You want to do the same thing with teaching. It's more than just, oh, I'm pretty good at it and I'm funny. That's not what being a good teacher is about. I'll tell you that helps a little bit, even if my students only pretend to laugh at my jokes. But there's a lot of interesting educational based research out there looking at different pedagogies of what's effective in the classroom. And so that was something that was new to me, but has become an important part of my life, obviously, at Otterbein.
So a question I was also wondering about was, do students or search committees see an industry experience or like after or before your PhD or a postdoc experience as beneficial? I know like a lot of R1 professors usually do a postdoc before they're a professor. Is that the same case as a teaching focused position, or is it better to just get right into teaching after?
Yeah, so in my obviously in my experience, it's possible to get a tenure track job without either, because I did not do a postdoc. And my industry experience was limited to standard internships with companies across the country during summers of my undergraduate. I would agree with you that at a place like an R1, and this is just anecdotally through friends of mine that have been looking for accepted positions, right? The postdoc position is extremely helpful. But at a place like Otterbein, I would say that an industry experience is extremely helpful. I mean, we do have students, a number of our undergrad students, when they graduate, do go to graduate school. But a lot of our students, and this is Otterbein in general, a lot of them are from around Central Ohio. They grew up here, they plan to stay here, and there are a lot of great engineering companies around town that are looking for bachelor's students from engineering programs. And so they want to, get through their program, get their degree, and start their career path. And so, having the knowledge of what it's like to be in those roles. And again, I'm saying this as someone who hasn't, but we know that's valuable because some of our faculty members have done that. We do also have an industrial advisory board that kind of help us out there. So we have, I think it's about 9 or 10 men and women from both local and global engineering companies that sit on a board to help us take a look at things like our curriculum, our program learning objectives. They help us, with our accreditation and recruiting. And so they're very helpful. So we kind of have a direct tie to these industry leaders because we know that's where a lot of our students want to end up. But that being said, we have a bunch of students. In fact, I'm writing 2 letters of recommendation for grad school as we speak. So I told them I'd get it done before Turkey Day. So
Got it. And then the kind of just switching gears a little bit, since you're also the department chair, I was wondering what the process entailed for that as well. And I know you just mentioned that around 2015 is where they were setting up their engineering department. And so as a new faculty member and then also kind of taking on these responsibilities, I was wondering, one, as to how the process was of selecting a department chair for such a new department. And then at the same time, how has the process been for you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course. And so, how we do it or did it here. And so our most recent department chair retired. And we were also physics. Our physics program was joining our department. So it's engineering, computer science, and physics is all one big happy family here at Otterbein. And so all of the faculty members actually nominated someone that they thought would be good for the position to our associate provost for faculty affairs. And then she looked at the nominations and, basically sat down with me because I was who was nominated to see if I wanted the role. And I did, absolutely. Being department chair is a lot of work. It's, it's a lot of expectations. You do get a reduction in teaching load. So normally for most faculty at Otterbein, we teach 7 courses throughout the year. So a 4-3 split, we call it. So 4 in one semester and 3 in the other. I get a little reduction there to do my chair duties, but I enjoy it because you really get to, and I know based on your questions that you posed, we might talk about this a little bit, but my PhD lab was essentially a startup. I always joke because I was the first graduate student in there. So I was building benches before I was doing DNA origami experiments. And same thing here, right? I was the second faculty member in engineering. And the gentleman who started this, Dr. Gary Mall, he has since retired. So it was kind of a startup of an engineering program. And I, had my hands in it from the beginning. I was still helping develop both curricula. We have a mechanical engineering program and a systems engineering program. So developing curricula. I've been on, I think I'm starting my 9th search committee that I'm a part of. So it's, I feel like, this sounds corny. Like, this is my baby, right? This is something that means a lot to me. And so I care about its direction. So having any opportunity to have a leadership role in that to help guide it on its path and guide its trajectory was definitely something I was more than willing to put my hat in the ring for.
Right.
So I know through email, we talked about you're going through the ABET accreditation for the undergraduate program. But we were also curious if, I know it's a primarily undergraduate institution, but we were curious if you're looking to expand to graduate programs sometime eventually in the long run future, and what process would that entail for you being a department chair, if so?
Yeah, so I think the immediate answer to that question is no, right? Our focus is going to be our undergraduate programs. I think if we were to expand, it would be with more undergraduate programs, so adding an additional engineering degree as opposed to the graduate school. And I think it comes down to, what is our lane? What are we good at? What are we focused on? Not just our department, but primarily the institution here. Like, obviously, that's in, primarily undergraduate institution. Our focus is that. And I think more than, thinking about what would it take to develop a graduate program, I would look at it as, how can we develop relationships and pipelines with established graduate programs that we know well. And so, for example, Mega, mechanical engineering at OSU and all their graduate programs, that's something I'm working on now with some folks about, okay, we have some good students that come out of Otterbein engineering that want to go to graduate school, and as a graduate from Ohio State's graduate programs, I can say they have a great graduate program, and I loved my time there. And so, to make that more of an official pipeline, I think would be more in our interest than it would be to develop our own program, where here we would want to still focus on the undergraduate experience and the undergraduate teaching.
Sorry, I was just curious if you had an idea of like which engineering major you'd be interested in adding next, because you talked about expanding to other engineering majors.
And and this is me thinking off the cuff, so there's been no official discussion. This was the case that we're talking a decade maybe, but something that relates to what we do now. So like I said, we do our mechanical engineering program. We also have a systems engineering program, which is, I like to think of it as a combination of mechanical, industrial systems, and electrical. So what I think would make the most sense, if it were up to me, would be electrical engineering. And that's just because, we have a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of our faculty that we currently have would be able to teach in those areas. I think of the other extreme side of the question, or the options would be chemical engineering. That's not in our wheelhouse. That has a lot of different courses on the curriculum. So not that direction would be my answer.
Cool.
And then I think going back a little bit to the process of being a faculty member, and I know you
Yeah.
mentioned about the application process and about tenure track positions. Uh, I was also wondering, so at a PUI, does the tenure track mean exactly the same, or does it have the same expectations as you would at, for example, OSU or any research heavy uh,
Sure.
institution?
Yeah, so I'm just speaking to my own experience here, what I went through, and then just knowing colleagues that are either going through the process or have been through the process at an R1. Our expectations, we all have the same expectations. We are required to meet qualifications and milestones in our research, in our teaching, and then our service and advising. And service and advising is at the student level, the department level, the university level, and the community level. If there was a difference, I would say it's the emphasis on teaching versus research. We have at Otterbein, we have both a research qualifications that we have to meet from the university, and then every department actually determines their own research statement and what is expected for not just promotion and tenure, but also if you want to be promoted to full professor, what your expectations are post tenure. And no, we don't just get to make it up and that's it. It has to be approved, obviously, by people up the ladder. But we do have expectations. We are expected to publish in peer-reviewed journals. We are expected to present our research. Many of us have undergraduate students that work with us. As we mentioned, we don't have grad students, so our pool is smaller. But I think our focus being in teaching would be number one, I would say, in terms of, what do we look? But as I'm sure with tenure and promotion, you have to have all three. Even if you're exceptional at teaching and you're the best teacher in the world and you haven't done any research, you have not met the requirements. I just think where the emphasis is might be different. And again, that's just my personal experience. But I still like doing my research. I personally, I try to and usually do attend and give a talk at least one conference a year. Our research sometimes takes a while, so I went a couple years without a publication and then got 2 in one summer. So that's kind of how our experiments work. But that's definitely still a part of my life and a part that I enjoy. But I would say that my primary aspect is teaching, and then I lump service to students into teaching. To me, that's kind of one and the same. Yeah, I would say that's the major differences.
Got it. And yeah, just like a follow-up to being the department chair, I was wondering, so now as the department chair, is reviewing tenure applications also something that you need to do as a part of your current service to the department, or?
Yes, it is actually. And so the tenure process at Otterbein for us is you go through your departmental review. So you have a committee made up of department members, and then a report is provided from the department. And then it goes up to our personnel committee, which is full professors from all across the university that go through the exact same process. And then those 2 letters of recommendation are sent to the provost, who then reviews them, and the provost and the president makes the decision. So because we're a small department, anybody that's going up for tenure, pretty much everybody in our department would be on said departmental committee. But as the chair, my extra duty was to actually, lead that process, write that report. Just went through it with a friend and colleague of mine who got her tenure last year. So congratulations to her. I know you guys will be talking with her soon. But yeah, and it's it's an exciting process. It's an interesting process. I'm really excited, actually. So as I mentioned, we're required and expected to do service, not just to students, but to our department and our university. And so to fill that role, I usually try and be on 1 or 2 committees a year in addition to my chair duties and other duties. So this year actually will be the first time I'm a member of what we call our interim tenure committee. And so the interim tenure committee, and this isn't departmental, it's, university-wide, but people that are after their third year, so typically you'll go up for tenure in your sixth year. After your third year, you put together a tenure portfolio that has all the same requirements. We don't expect that maybe you haven't met them yet because you have 6 years, but this is just a committee that's designed to take a look at your progress thus far and say, you're doing great, keep going, or, hey, here's maybe where you want to focus and improve a little bit before that 6th year comes. So, I keep realizing that when I say a new and young faculty member, that's getting less and less true. But let's call it a middle of the road faculty member. I can help some of the entry level faculty members. I know what it was like going through that process. I know it's both scary and exciting. And so really letting them realize that, tenure is, if you've been doing your job, tenure is a place to show off your work and be proud of what you've done over the past 6 years. And when you look at it that way, it's less daunting and less like a test or a dissertation defense you have to pass. So.
So related to the tenure stuff, you talked about how teaching is generally more, a little bit more important than research at a institution like this. How do they evaluate teaching? I guess, is it through like the SEI's student evaluation of instructors, or are there other methods?
Absolutely, yeah. So just like any university, right, we have our end of semester evaluations where we encourage as best we can to have students fill them out, and you have response rate anywhere from 20 to 80% usually. But I think a lot of us, especially, like I said, we really are passionate about what we do in the classroom. We're interested and concerned about our effectiveness. And so a lot of us do our own thing. I have 2 evaluations that I developed all the questions for them, that I give week 6 or week 7 into the 15-week semester, and one that I give in week 15, just to kind of see progress. And this is just for me. This is not something I report out to the university, but like the data nerd that I am, I put all of this data into a spreadsheet. I graph it on Excel. I have a graph that shows, final grade in the course versus how many hours per week you put into your homework, but also how am I doing, right? What am I doing right? What am I doing that works? I have used this to evaluate the effectiveness of the textbook that I chose, right? I chose a textbook because it made sense to me, or maybe I was familiar with it. And then I've gotten feedback from students that, it's not that great and it's a little confusing. So that is something I do on my own. Now, I did use that stuff in my tenure portfolio to say, like, hey, this is me improving my craft, but that's not why I did it. I do that on like I said, twice a semester to really look at what am I doing in the class that works. And sometimes that's shocking. I'll give you a little hint. So something that I started doing in both my I teach statics, mechanics and materials, and dynamics. They're challenging sophomore level courses. It's kind of your first real hit of, oh, this is engineering. Welcome to math land. And so what I started doing since day one is every single lecture, every single time you come into class, you have a quiz for 5 minutes. And I call them not so pop quizzes because, like I said, I think I'm funny. So they're not so pop quizzes. They're 5 minutes and they only cover big picture concepts from the previous class. There's no math. Okay, there might be a little tiny math, but you're not doing big long problems. It's conceptual type stuff, forcing students like, hey, after lecture, spend 10 minutes going over what we talked about, kind of thing. I also give them a little perk that they can use their collective not so pop quizzes score to replace a test. So maybe this is why they end up liking that. But why I bring this up is because you would think if you tell students you are going to have a quiz every single day in this class, they're going to be mad about it. But when I ask students, how effective were the not so pop quizzes, or what was the best thing in class that helped you learn the most, more often than not, I get very high scores on the quizzes. And even the comments they sometimes write in was, you know what, I did hate them because this is an 8 a.m. class, but it worked and it helped, kind of thing. So that's always something that I always laugh about to myself. But
Makes sense. And kind of you kind of touched this a little bit, and I remember I think you showed us some of that data that you were talking about
Yeah,
when you came to OSU as well. So the other thing that I was wondering is that since you've been kind of collecting this data over the years, uh, at this point, can you clearly looking back at, let's say, your first year at Otterbein versus now, can you see a change in your own teaching philosophy over the years, or something that you have realized uh, that has changed
yeah,
compared to, yeah, a new
yeah,
faculty?
absolutely. I would think my big picture teaching philosophy has not changed. Um, and when I think about what is my big picture teaching philosophy is, you know, science is cool and it should be fun, and so should the classroom. It's going to be a lot of work, but that doesn't mean it has to be miserable. And even your favorite thing sometimes is grueling, right? Imagine, let's say you play baseball and okay, you hate when you have to sprint. There are things about, anything that you enjoy that aren't going to be your favorite. But you should have fun in a classroom. Learning should be exciting. I think what has changed is, I'm a forever student. I'm learning every single day. I'm learning about things that work. I'm learning about things that don't work. I'm learning different, sometimes better and new ways to explain the same topics. One thing I've learned is, obviously I got my PhD, so I was at least decent at school, right? And now I teach this stuff. And so statics, for example, vector mechanics, I have to constantly remind myself, like, yes, this is very easy for me because I've been doing it, every single day for 20 years. If a student is just coming in, this is all new and fresh. And I have to always consciously remind myself that, even though this is the 8th time I've taught this class, this is the first time this student is taking this class. But you'll find, and students will joke because they'll pop into my office and I'll be watching a YouTube video on something we're doing in class. They're like, "Oh, Dr. Mike, what, you catching up? You don't understand what you're teaching?" I'm like, "No, I'm maybe trying to figure out different ways of explaining the same stuff. Like, this worked for me, but I'm sure you guys know, as students, hearing things said differently and different analogies and different ways of thinking about things does nothing but reinforce that material more. And all students learn differently. So something that might work for you might not work for you. And so basically adding more and more tools to my tool bag when I'm in front of the classroom is something that I'll never give up doing, and I really enjoy it. But yeah, my if you look at my algorithmic recommendations on YouTube, it's either some crazy, thing about dynamics and engineering classes or Zelda speed runs. So that's pretty much what I do on YouTube. So
Right. I suppose the Zelda stuff also has like a lot of new physics-based things, right? So I think maybe
yeah,
that could also be used as examples in some statics class.
there you go. Well, mental mapping is what I say. A Zelda game is all about, it's a logic
Right.
puzzle. So yeah, I'm in my free time, I speed run on Twitch once in a while. So
Yeah, you talked about that. Yeah.
yeah.
I think you also talked about doing a collaborative class about video games, or like
Yeah.
incorporating engineering with video games with someone from a humanities
Yeah,
side.
absolutely. So I was fortunate, like I said, when I was newly hired here, you go through the orientation with all of the new faculty of that year. And I met a colleague, now dear friend of mine, Dr. Corrado, who is also a big Buckeye fan as well. Ironically, we're both from the same hometown. We're both from Youngstown. She went to the same high school as my parents, but she'll be mad at me if I don't tell you it was different years. But she is in sociology, and I am in engineering, and we've become best buddies. And so we were talking about, what's a class we can come up with and teach together, because Otterbein does general education a little differently. So our gen ed classes, or what you might refer to as gen ed classes, we call them integrative studies. So, our students don't take like sociology 1000, for example, but we have different general themes of what classes should be focused on. But let's hit those educational objectives through some other concept. And so, for example, her and I came up with a INST course called Video Games and Society. And so it was basically looking at how does video games affect, American culture, American society. It was great because, I'm the design side of things. I'm the engineering side. I'm a numbers person. Dr. Corrado is, thinking more about the impact in society. I play a lot of video games. She has never picked up a video game controller except Snood, I believe, is the game that she plays. So we both kind of approached it from different perspectives. We were intentional with our students. It was a team teaching class. We were not afraid to have disagreements in front of the class because we wanted to show there are two sides and two ways of thinking about different topics, and B, especially in the current climate of this country, you can have respectful conversation and disagreements with friends and colleagues and, high five and walk away with a smile at the end of the conversation. And so we were intentional about that. It was a lot of fun. We had, labs where students would, design their own controllers, but then we had, a lot more, focus on serious issues like, for example, racism or sexism in the video game community. And as a gamer, it really opened my eyes, right? I did a lot of research to develop this class, and there are some things that really made me stop and think differently about the games I play and how you interact with others online. And so it was a great experience. And I have a lot of engineering students that took that class and said they got a lot out of it. So it was great.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like a very interesting experience to have as an instructor. And speaking of slightly other interesting things, I also noticed that you hold a Guinness World Record
Yeah,
for some of the work that you're doing here during your PhD. Could you share how that came about?
sure. So the research that I still do and did with my PhD with Dr. Castro was DNA origami. So it's the process of making machines at the nanoscale made out of DNA. So when people hear DNA, a lot of times they immediately think genetics. But for us as mechanical engineers, DNA is our construction tool, right? It's our construction material. It's our brick and mortar. And origami because we don't physically get really tiny tweezers and build these machines, right? We code them and sequence them to self-assemble, and essentially they fold up into the predetermined shape. And so that's where the name DNA origami comes from. When I started my PhD, Dr. Castro did his postdoc at the Technical University of Munich. He sent me there to visit so I could kind of get a head start and learn how to set up a lab and learn what the equipment was, right? I was coming into this blind. And so I gave a presentation on what my first project was going to be. And like any good Ohio State student, my questions slide just had a picture of the script Ohio that the marching band does. And one of the students in Munich, I don't think he even really knew what American college football was, but said, hey, you should make that out of DNA, like almost in passing. I thought that was a cool idea, but it took me 3 years. And it was a very, very complex design. And in fact, I'll never forget, and we have a software you could basically put in essentially a CAD drawing that you have of your DNA device, and it will give you a 3D model. It will predict 3D modeling based on energy states. And because this was a very complex design, the model just broke down. It just looked like a ball of nothingness. And so I had to convince, it didn't take too much, but convince Dr. Castro that, trust me, I am right and the computer is wrong. Please, can I have money to buy this DNA? We won't get a paper out of it, but it'll be really cool and we'll get some publicity. He said, I trust you, let's go. And so, I made it. And that's when we realized it might be the smallest logo made out of biological material. So we looked into it. We contacted Guinness. I had to send them official electron microscopy pictures and things like that. And the dispatch came and did a pretty neat YouTube video. You can Google DNA script Ohio, but it was a lot of fun for sure. And I still actually right next to me on the wall, I have my Guinness World Record certificate sitting up there that Santa Claus actually framed it for me. So
Cool. So related to like more of the research side and DNA origami stuff, how does getting undergrads involved with your research at Otterbein work with probably a smaller startup package? Did you have to use different equipment? Are you still able to send them to conferences? How does more of like the funding side of things?
Yeah, so obviously funding is different. We have internal university funding that we can apply for, both for research projects, basically two-tiered system. You could smaller monies if you needed just a little bit of money to get some material or get a project going, and then larger chunks of money that you can get if you want a piece of equipment or something that's really going to help your research. Obviously we apply for external grants, and they do, like the NSF, for example, has grants specifically for PUIs, so significant amount of money for a pool of researchers that aren't at R1 institutions, which is great because it kind of helps level the playing field. So yeah, I am able to, I was able to fund my undergraduate student who worked with me for about 2 summers. We do have students go to conferences. For conferences, we have travel in our department budget, and we have travel grants that we can apply for through the university as well. But different from, you might see a lab at Ohio State that has 3 postdocs, 5 PhDs, 4 master's students, and 8 undergrads. I have 1 or 2, and Dr. Crothers has 2 or 3, and things like that. So it's a smaller population. But what is neat is we do want to expose as many of our students as we can to some of this graduate level research to make, maybe they had no idea that they might be interested in doing something like graduate school or maybe a research-based career. So we did actually something pretty unique with some of our engineering technical electives. So there's numerous courses you can take as your engineering technical electives. But Dr. Crothers and I and Dr. Mendelson, actually all 3 developed a technical elective focused around our research area. And so, for example, in my class, you come in, we learn the history of DNA nanotechnology. We get up to date on the state of the field. They do reports, they do presentations. They actually do their own experimenting in DNA origami folding. That's actually what my research focus is now. You had mentioned, how do you afford some of this stuff? Well, fortunately, what my past 2 research papers were, working still with Dr. Castro, was basically how do you do DNA origami experiments low cost? And we basically developed methods where for about $150, you can be set up to do this in a middle school classroom. You don't need a $30,000 water purification device. I go and buy distilled water from Kroger and found that it works. And so that, it was almost neat because by necessity, it forced me to get creative and stumble into this. We don't need this crazy equipment to do this. And so in my elective class, students run through this procedure and they make their own DNA origami device. And so it's really neat, and it's a really cool experience that has led some of our students to grad school. In fact, one of our graduates ended up going to Dr. Castro's lab and actually taking over my project that I had left behind there. So
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And going just to follow up on the funding thing, I remember that you were saying that I think for the senior year, like equivalent kind of projects and elective research focus elective courses that you have there, like at times there are some tie-ins with certain industrial projects.
yes,
Uh,
yeah.
so how does that work as well? Like, does the faculty member interested in collaborating with a particular industry approach them, or yeah?
So it's where we stand now, because we've been doing this for a number of years and we have a good network. Like I said, we have our industrial advisory board members. But the process we have now for our senior capstone students in especially in our systems engineering program, is basically we have a form we send out to a lot of our industry partners. That bucket is growing, right? So if we have students that end up at graduates that end up at a new company, and we say, hey, keep in mind, if you ever can think of a project, let us know. And we send to them with the basic, letting us know what this project is. And then as faculty, what we do is we will look at them, evaluate, how well will this serve as a project, right? Does it have enough breadth? Does it have enough depth? Does the time scale make sense, right? Can this be done in the 13, 14, 15 weeks? Or is it too short? Is it too long? So we kind of take the project idea and make it classroom ready. And what's great about that is, and what we've learned talking to a lot of our company partners, I'll give a shout out to Valvoline, for example. So, Valvoline has become a great partner of ours. I think every year they have 2 or 3 projects that they develop for us. A lot of times those projects involve them sending our students on a field trip to come and see their facility, see the project they're actually working on. And what we found is, right, a lot of companies have, man, this is a great idea for a project. We don't have the time or the people to work on this right now. They're doing other stuff that have deadlines. This is just something, wouldn't it be nice if we had a group to work on this, but we don't. And what we found is there are a lot of those. And so we say, give us your on-the-shelf projects. And if you want, 5 20-some-year-old students to kind of throw their ideas out and see what they come up with, you might get some really good ideas out of it. So it's a great experience for them because as the faculty members, we serve as what we call the sponsors of our capstone, or I'm sorry, the mentors of our capstone students. So we advise and answer questions and help guide, but the sponsors come from the companies, and the sponsors will, you have to give the presentation to the sponsors. You have to write the report and send that to them, and they help provide us feedback. And so it's a really good, I jokingly call it a dry run of the rest of your life, right? You're really working with, if you end up in an industry like that, but you really give you the opportunity to meet with people and give these presentations. And I'll never forget, we had a group doing a project, and they had to basically determine, there's this old machine, and it was, what would it cost to fix and refurbish and get this one up and running versus what would it cost to buy a new one? And, these are real dollars, and, we're talking high 6 figures kind of dollars. And the students give their presentation. They were great students. The report was thorough and awesome. And they were giving it to the head of this company and this team. And they went, yeah, sounds good. All right, let's get it. And the students were like, oh, wait, this is real? They're like, yeah, this is real. We trust you. And, like they knew that, but obviously like that shock of, oh, you're going to spend a lot of money based on my advice. That's intimidating, but it was a great experience for everybody. So.
So I had one more question related to both teaching and research.
Mm-hmm.
Are you involved in any engineering education research or more like pedagogy research? I know you said you give out some like quizzes to people to evaluate your teaching and improve throughout the semester, but I didn't know if professors at Otterbein also go to more engineering education conferences and present research like that.
Yeah, so absolutely. There's a handful of answers to this question. So our newest hire at Otterbein in engineering actually has her PhD in engineering education. And so we have that to work with now, and I'm excited to see where her research goes as a faculty member. I am on 2 external grants that are focused on STEM education and engineering education, and conferences that I attend. I attend a lot of conferences. Actually, just 2 weeks ago, I was at AACNU, their national STEM conference for STEM and higher education. And right, as I mentioned, with in my PhD, I was used to going to conferences where you were just talking about, here's the research project I did, here's the results I got, and you just saw that. And this is a very different style of conference than I was used to, but extremely interesting stuff, an area that I'm becoming more and more interested in, and actually had the opportunity to see a couple talks, was on the uses and benefits of AI in engineering education and where we can go from there. I saw a great talk. I wish I had the notes in front of me to give her credit, but I believe it was from University of Kentucky, looking at mental health in undergraduate engineering students, which was fascinating research and something that I'm hoping to contribute to if I can, because that's something that I think is very important and probably overlooked. But yeah, so it's different from what you might be used to, but it's exciting stuff, and definitely stuff that I hope to continue to make a more important part of my life, directly as I start to think about new areas of research and new ways to implement things into my class.
Got it. Yeah, sounds great. I know that we're kind of nearing the end of our time. We would have loved to keep hearing about all of these different stories, but we know that we have to let you go soon. So I'll ask my wrap-up question that I usually do. So,
Sure.
what advice do you have to share for current students? And I usually try to segregate them into like three categories. So, students who just started off their program, versus someone who's in the middle, versus somebody who is almost like ready to graduate. Uh,
Mhm. Sure. I'd say for early students, develop good habits and good routines. Especially, and I have this conversation with a lot of my students, right? If you're going into engineering as an undergrad, chances are you were probably pretty good in high school, and maybe you've never seen a grade below a B or something along those lines. And then you get into college and it's engineering, and it's, whoa, okay, I didn't know I had to study, and maybe you learn you don't know how to study. And so those first 2 years is really a good thing, a good place to develop those good routines, getting those good habits. I always say, office hours aren't for the students that are failing, right? And that sometimes that's what undergrads think is, oh, I'm doing fine in the class. Why would I go to office hours? Get used to going to office hours. Get used to helping yourself outside of the classroom, right? It's college level learning, what you teach yourself is just as important as what you learn in the classroom. It's that work you do outside. It's the homework you do. It's, okay, I didn't quite understand this. What are my additional resources, office hours, YouTube, other textbooks, whatever it might be. But getting in those habits is great. I think that maybe will lead to and help the middle group of students is, take care of yourself. Don't let yourself get burned out. School is important. Your grades are important, but so is your happiness and your well-being, and stay positive. Don't be afraid to take breaks. Don't be afraid to take a weekend off. Now, if you have a final on Monday, okay, you got to give up your Sunday. I get it. But don't overdo it. And I think if you listen to my first piece of advice, right, and develop good habits and good routines, you can have the time and the luxury of, okay, you know what? I got Saturday's game day. I'm going to watch the game this Saturday, and I'm not going to do anything else. And that's okay. And then I think when it comes to those, close to graduation, first, don't be afraid to be proud of yourself. Getting an engineering degree is not an easy thing to do. And so it's okay to be proud of the work that you've done and what you've accomplished. When you're looking for jobs or graduate school or whatever it might be, I always tell my students, cast a wide net. Cast a wide net, because you don't know what is out there. You might have an idea of what you're interested in, but the thing you're interested in most, you might not know is an option or even exists. So don't be afraid to try something new, right? Your first job is statistically probably not going to be your only job. Very few people only have one job for their entire life. And so cast a wide net. Don't be afraid to take a risk. You've got that far on your hard work. And so, you'll be able to do whatever you put your mind to. So I think that would be my 3 sets of advice.
Perfect. And just adding on to that, curious if you had anything specifically for grad students.
For graduate students, similar to what I said about students that were graduating, think about all your options. This is what I talked a little bit about in my seminar, right? Your options aren't just, industry research or an R1 institution. There are a lot of other things you can do, both in and outside of engineering. Like, it's okay to get an engineering PhD and end up not necessarily in engineering, because you ultimately want to do something that is of interest to you, something that makes you excited to get out of bed in the morning, right? You gotta, I don't really like the phrase, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life, because it's still work. Like, let's be honest, but you still should enjoy it a little bit, right? Yeah, we're all going to have bad days on the job, but I do love what I do. Yeah, I'm frustrated sometimes. But I love this job and I enjoy it, and it gets me out of the bed every morning, and I'm happy to be here. And so, really thinking about, what would make you happy to do for a career. And if it's not related to your PhD field or your PhD research, that's okay. Sometimes maybe I have to find something in this area because that's what I just did for the past 5 years. No, you spent the past 5 years growing and developing and learning how to learn and learning how to solve problems. That's the big picture that you take away from it. So.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you very much again for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Before you leave, is there anything else that you would like to share, like maybe any job opportunities at Otterbein or anything else?
Sure, absolutely. So if you go to Otterbein Careers, you can Google Otterbein Careers. We're a growing program in both our engineerings, our computer science, and our physics. If you're about to graduate, you're looking for full-time positions, that's where you'll be able to find some opportunities. If you're a graduate student, right, and you're thinking, maybe I want to try an adjunct to class, there's opportunities there. You could find the jobs on there, or you could reach out to me personally. You could find my email on our website, mhudoba@otterbein.edu, and say, hey, I'd be interested if you ever had an opening for someone to teach, intro physics or fluids or anything like that. I would encourage you to do so, and we'd love to chat. So.
Perfect. So yeah, for all the listeners, I'll go ahead and even put in Dr. Hudoba's Otterbein bio link in the YouTube description, so that way you can reach out to him if you feel like. And yeah, I think that's, I believe, everything that we have for the episode. For all the viewers, again, I just want to remind you that in the YouTube description, we have links to all of our other different social media platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn. So please feel free to connect there. We're also posting podcast shorts on the Instagram and LinkedIn page. So if you want to view these in smaller bit-sized pieces, that's the place you want to go. All right. Thank you
And can I
very
say
much.
one more thing?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Saturday, big day. Let's beat that team up north. Go Bucks, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you both again for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and stop the recording.